The cold morning sun crept across the towering windows of the Grant mansion, glinting off the polished marble floors that led to a lonely wheelchair parked near the balcony. Inside it sat Alexander Grant, the youngest billionaire in the country, a man once known for his fierce determination, his sharp mind, and his unstoppable will. But all of that had changed 2 years ago, the day a car crash shattered not just his spine, but his entire purpose for living. From the chest down, he was paralyzed. The doctors said he'd never walk again. The world called it fate. Alexander called it punishment. He used to run a global tech empire, lead thousands of employees, and inspire millions with his innovation. But now, his days began and ended with silence. No meetings, no laughter, no drive. Just endless pain, anger, and regret. His mansion, once alive with people, had become a museum of memories. The man who once conquered the business world now stared endlessly at the sky, wishing the night would never end, because every sunrise reminded him of what he'd lost. If you believe in kindness, in miracles, and in the power of second chances, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to this channel. Because this story will remind you that sometimes life's most extraordinary moments come from the most unexpected people. Days turned into months and months into years. Alexander became a ghost inside his own home. He avoided everyone, nurses, friends, even family. His mother had passed away long ago, and his father had disowned him after the accident, blaming him for tarnishing the family name with his weakness. Only one person remained by his side, his loyal butler, Mr. Howard, who silently watched his master's light fade with each passing day. Then, one humid afternoon, as rain clouds gathered over the city, the mansion's front gate buzzed. Howard opened it to find a young black girl standing there, soaked from the drizzle, her clothes simple A.N.D. worn, carrying a small wooden box in her hands. Her name was Lila. She wasn't from the city. She'd come from a small village miles away. She said she was there to deliver something special, something that could heal. Howard, skeptical but kind, tried to send her away. The billionaire didn't accept visitors, let alone strangers with strange boxes. But Lila's eyes were full of conviction, a quiet strength that made Howard hesitate. Against his instincts, he let her in. When Lila entered the vast mansion, her gaze swept across the cold walls and empty halls. "So much wealth," she whispered softly, "and yet so much sadness." Her words echoed faintly, as if the house itself was listening. She breathed. When she saw Alexander, she didn't see the billionaire. She saw the pain in his eyes, the invisible cage of despair he'd built around himself. He looked at her, emotionless, wondering who she was and why she was there. She stepped closer, holding up the wooden box. "I know you've been told that healing is impossible," she said gently, "but maybe you just haven't met the right miracle yet." Alexander almost laughed. For 2 years, he'd seen every doctor, tried every experimental treatment, every advanced therapy money could buy. Nothing worked. Now this girl, barely 20, stood before him, talking about miracles. But there was something different about her tone, something in the way her eyes didn't pity him. Instead, they saw through him, into his soul. Without waiting for permission, Lila opened the box. Inside was a small crystal bottle filled with a shimmering golden blue liquid that seemed to glow faintly even in the dim light. "It's something my grandmother made," she said. "She called it the spirit dew. It's not magic, but it's not ordinary either. It only works when used with belief." Alexander turned away, muttering bitterly, "Belief doesn't fix nerves or broken spines." Lila didn't reply. She simply knelt by his wheelchair and sprayed a sing. The mist of the liquid over his legs. A soft, cool breeze seemed to ripple through the room. Alexander felt nothing at first, just the usual emptiness below his waist. But then, a strange warmth spread slowly through his veins. For the first time in 2 years, he felt something, faint but real, like a spark of electricity dancing under his skin. His breath caught in his throat. Lila looked at him calmly. "It's working," she said quietly. "But it's not the spray, it's you." Alexander didn't know whether to be terrified or hopeful. That night, as he lay awake in bed, He couldn't shake the sensation he'd felt. His mind raced. Maybe it was his imagination, or maybe that strange girl had done something real. But a small part of him, the part that still dared to dream, wanted to believe. Abru. The next morning, Lila was gone. She had left the wooden box on the table with a note. Use it once a day, but only when your heart feels ready to believe again. For days, Alexander ignored it, but each night that memory returned. The faint warmth, the impossible feeling. One morning, he wheeled himself to the balcony, looked out over the rising sun, and whispered to himself, "What do I have left to lose?" He sprayed it again. Ebritha that time, he felt the warmth stronger. It wasn't pain, it was life. He gripped the sides of his chair, his heart pounding. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sadness, but from something he hadn't felt in years: hope. He began using the liquid daily, each time focusing not on his brokenness, but on what Lila had said: belief. Slowly, miraculously, sensation returned. First his thighs, then his knees. Then one unforgettable morning, his toes twitched. Howard dropped the tray he was holding when he saw it happen. Both men stared at each other, speechless. The news spread quietly among the mansion staff. Alexander's progress continued. Every day he pushed harder, practiced longer, and believed deeper. He started smiling again. He even began working on his company remotely, surprising his board with a renewed energy they hadn't seen in years. But he couldn't find Lila. He sent people to the village she'd mentioned, but no one had ever heard of her. No record, no family, nothing. It was as if she'd appeared from thin air. Hebrew months passed, and Alexander finally stood again. It was a quiet moment, just him and Howard in the study. The billionaire gripped his walker, trembling, his legs weak but alive. Step by shaky step, he walked toward the window. When sunlight hit his face, he wept. Not from triumph, but from gratitude. He began dedicating his time to building a new division of his company, one focused on medical innovation and accessibility for the disabled. He called it the Lila Project, in honor of the mysterious girl who gave him back his life. Through this project, he funded free treatment programs for people who couldn't afford healthcare. He built hospitals in forgotten places and schools in villages that had none. Yet deep inside, one question haunted him. Who was she? Ibruwi. 1 year later, during a charity event in one of those new hospitals, Alexander met a little girl sitting in a wheelchair near the back. She was around 9, with deep brown eyes and a shy smile. Her mother stood beside her, a nurse at the hospital. When Alexander approached, the woman smiled gently and said, "You remind me of my sister." He froze. "Your sister?" She nodded. Her name was Lila. She passed away 3 years ago in a flood. Before she died, she used to mix herbs and oils, saying they could heal what medicine couldn't. She always said her dream was to help someone who'd lost hope. Ebru Sanders' heart stopped. 3 years ago? But that was a year before Lila appeared at his mansion. His eyes filled with tears. He realized then that the girl who had come to him wasn't of this world, but of something higher, something divine. He knelt beside the little girl and handed her a pendant, a sem. All gold charm he always carried since the day he walked again. "This belongs to your sister," he whispered. "She changed my life." The girl smiled softly and said, "She still does." That night, Alexander sat alone under the stars, holding the empty bottle of the spirit dew. He no longer needed it. What he needed, what he'd finally found, was faith. Not in a liquid, not in wealth, but in the invisible thread that connects every act of kindness in this world. The billionaire who once had everything but felt nothing now had nothing material left to gain. But his heart was full, and somewhere, in the quiet night, he could almost hear Lila's voice whisper, "It only works when you believe." If this story touched your heart, please like, share, comment, and subscribe to this channel. Your support helps us spread more stories that remind the world that kindness still exists, and miracles are real for those who believe. And before you go, comment below what you would do if someone gave you one last chance to believe again. As the camera fades out, we see Alexander walking along a quiet garden path. No wheelchair, no pain, just a man reborn. The wind carries a soft fragrance, faintly sweet, like something sprayed gently into the air. And for a moment, the impossible feels possible again.